Coming up on the forum, we'll be having a conversation about the upcoming election and voters, especially in the Latino communities. Good afternoon, my name is Sanni, host of SPNN's Forum, and today we're having a conversation with Sam Verdeja and Maria de la Paz. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Maria, can you tell us a little bit about what you do in the office of the Secretary of State?
I go to various communities, the Latino community and the population in general. We're out there to register eligible voters, and we've gone to various places from colleges, churches, community fairs. We were at the state fair this past month, and we registered over 700 eligible voters.
You were also at the Mexican Independence Day
And I was at the, yes.
I was wondering about that. Okay.
Yes, at Lake Street this past Sunday.
Do you start your voter registration efforts closer to the election, or how far back do you work on something like this?
Well, we started back in June.
Okay.
And we've been out there in the community because the primaries were coming in August 12th. And so letting people know, you know, what the process of what's going on as far as the primaries and the absentee ballots that is available now without having an excuse. You can request an absentee ballot and it would be sent to you as long as you get it back, you know, by November 4th.
Okay.
And October 14th is the deadline. After then, you can't pre-register anymore.
Okay. So what happens after you can't pre-register? What are your options between October and November?
You have to show up at the polls.
Okay. For people who are watching, what is the process to make it easier? Step 1, step 2, step 3?
Well, first they have to be a U.S. citizen, and they have to be 18 years old or older. They have to, if they have a felony, be off paper to, you know, be able to be eligible to vote again. And in the easiest process that we tell people out there is to go to mnvotes.org and register online. And also you'll find out who the candidates are. There's a sample ballot you can look at since already the primaries already happened, and people will know who is the candidates are in what particular party. So there's a lot of information they can find out through registering online.
Out of all the issues with voter registration, what issue do you see coming up the most? What piece of the puzzle is the most confusing?
Well, it's not really confusing as much as understanding that, you know, if you moved and you have an address change, it doesn't follow you to the next place you move to. And for the system to be updated, because, you know, when you register online, you know, as far as process, you know, you'll get a card be sent to you where it'll tell you where your voting polling is. And so, and it's important for that data to be, you know, updated, you know. And so therefore, you'll go to the right election polling. You can't go to the place you used to because of the redistricting, you know. It might have cut off where on the other side of the street, it might be at a different precinct.
Right.
So those kind of things.
And voter ID is an issue because, for example, in the Latino community, you have individuals that are skeptical about going to the polls. Why? Because they're going to be singled out. And I know that the system, what you address is fine-tuning how to get people to the polls or even register before absentee voting and so on. But still, in the Latino community, there's issues of voter ID, in other words. And there's issues. I mean, even Latinos who move from one area to another, they don't know that they have to re-register, or if they do, they need to be sure that they know where to go to re-register.
I wonder if anybody knows that.
Exactly.
It might not just be to the Latino community.
Exactly. And in the Latino community, I mean, there's issues of geez, do we want to go vote because we're going to be asked for more information than someone else, you know, the voter ID, and that's something that the legislature is dealing with at the moment, or has been dealing with.
Is that something that you've heard as a complaint when you've gone out into the community and tried to educate people? I am learning that the Latino vote is probably not in a healthy number.
Right, for other demographics
as far as other demographics, is that a concern that they feel like they're going to be hassled more than other people?
Well, I think that was the case in the past, and whether it's the case now remains to be seen. But one of the things that Maria and I were talking about that is that we need to target those in the Latino community, those the parents, for example, who for whatever reason may not be able to vote, but the voting, there's a large voting block between 18 and 24.
18 and 34?
And 34.
Okay.
And in our community, and we need to get the message out to those that they can be civically engaged, and voting is one of those civic responsibilities. In other words, where the parents may not be able to vote, or the elders may not be able to vote for whatever reason, that the younger generation can, or if they can't, if they're 18 and they fit all the criteria. And if they're not eligible to vote now we're talking about an election now in November, but we're also talking about a presidential election in 2 years.
Right.
So a person who's 16 years old is going to be 18 years old in 2 years.
Right.
Will have a major impact in terms of Latino vote in the presidential election.
So do you have efforts talking to 16-year-olds right now?
Well, I think it's part of the community to do that, and the effort that probably should continue.
But also, they're the less recognized in terms of the voter impact. You know, for example, without getting too much into the details of that particular election, the Frank and Coleman race, but it was lost by a very, very small margin, very small. And if Latinos, had they paid, the candidates, paid more attention to the Latino voter impact, that margin might have made a difference. Now, I'm not supporting or speaking on behalf of any party,
right,
but I'm saying that the parties need to pay, all parties, efforts need to pay attention to the Latino vote.
To their constituents.
So our responsibility in the Latino community is to make sure that we generate that, we mobilize and generate that activity in terms of voter turnout. And secondly is to identify what impact that will have. And thirdly is, once we determine the impact, is how do we mobilize policy so that it impacts the Latino community overall. In Minnesota, we're over 250,000. That's about 5% of the population, I think I read somewhere. That has a major impact on what our role can be in area policy. What the Secretary of State's doing is mobilizing communities by informing them, but not only for, now I vote, my family votes, we know we can vote, but there's families that we know that they can't vote, but what they need to know, and we need to inform them, is that we need to inform their community, their neighbors, their siblings, their sons and daughters, that if they're 18, you can vote. You should vote. If you're 16, prepare for the next 2 years, which is a presidential year, to vote. And I think we need to really inform the leadership of the community on how to be more active. You know, I'm a firm believer, and I've said this to Maria, we have 2 state senators, we have 1 House of Representatives, and we have other elected officials. But in proportion to the population, the demographics in the Latino community, I don't think we have enough representation across the board. So we need to get more voter turnouts in the Latino community. We also need to get more candidates.
When you guys set up your efforts to reach out to the community, do you feel like they are addressing some of the reasons why people aren't voting?
That's been another facet in the past, perhaps, but what we're dealing with is just if they're eligible to vote, and a lot of times they already know they can't vote.
Okay, so then you're really not talking to that group of people.
Right.
You're looking more for the...
Right, yeah. But it's out there. It is out there.
But those folks that know they can't vote, they also can influence those that can vote.
Okay.
And that's my issue, is that in our community, we do have those, for whatever reason, they either choose not to vote or they can't vote, but they have a strong voice in influencing those that can vote and help make a difference in terms of the voter turnout.
like Sam said, you know, to inform them that they can tell their children, and I have, or their neighbors, or if they, where they work at, or wherever people are around that they know they can vote, you know, encourage them, give them this information. We have some cue cards that we pass out to them, you know, in Spanish, English. We have them in Hmong and Somali also. Okay. But yeah, it's not just the Latinos that it might not be able to register. There's another demographic out there that's also facing the same thing. But it seemed like, in a positive note, that I hear is like, oh, I wish I could. I can't until a couple of years.
Okay.
I will soon, you know. So that's hopeful.
Good news, yeah.
Yeah, it is good
For
news.
further.
It's encouraging, something that I haven't heard before. And I'm learning as well as anybody else, you know, what is going on in the Latino community. Why aren't they voting? What's the problem here? And I'm learning, you know, and we're all learning all together, what is the problem? And some things need to be reformed. I see that a lot. But definitely is having people valuing the family system. I grew up too with not being encouraged to vote. I decided this is what I was going to do, and I have encouraged my children to do the same. And it's just something that we got to get out there for the parents of minority children to get engaged, to feel that the government is part of a responsibility, a duty as an American. It affects them in everyday life. Whatever the laws are or legislation does or doesn't do. The people that are elected into office are there for us. We elect them, hold them accountable to the issues that we believe in. It's a bigger part, and I do hear some of the other people saying, oh, the government doesn't do anything for us. Well, they do pave the streets, you know. There's a lot of stuff that are out there that the government does good for us.
You are watching SPNN's Forum. My name is Sanni, and sitting with me today is Sam Verdeja and Maria de la Paz, and we are talking about the upcoming election. I had a question, and I think this is important, and I think this might help. I think before I even get into this, you said a large group in the Latino community of voters is the 18 to 34 age group. And I know for younger people, a lot of times when they realize they can vote, they don't really know who they're voting for.
Right, and that's why we encourage them to go to mnvotes.org, and you know, on there you can see who the candidates are that are running for particular office, like of course the governor, the U.S. Senate, House of Representatives, the state, county, and local offices in their area. What West St. Paul local offices, people that are running, it's not the same as Inver Grove Heights or Minneapolis or Blaine and stuff like that. So it's important that wherever they're at, if they go online, they can enter their address and find out who are those people in those particular areas that they live at in those precincts. And so the candidates, they can check out their websites, learn more
of
about
the actual candidates?
Of the actual candidate, yes. They can look at a ballot, who's on there. And again, if they would like to vote absentee, it's available to them now.
What is that absentee?
That means that you can request by mail a ballot that will be sent to the people, and then to the person, they can fill it out and mail it back in to the office they requested. Either you can go to the county or city and request them too, or the Secretary of State office, where, you know, and usually in the back of, like for us, we have, because I work with Secretary of State, it'll show you to send it here. But others, like in Minneapolis, might have Hennepin County or Ramsey County or Dakota County, where they have to mail it back in.
What's the purpose of it?
So the purpose of it is that actually there's no excuses that you have to make up, or you know.
Is it like early voting?
It's kind of like early voting. Is you
Okay.
just get it out of the way because either you're going out of town or
Okay.
it's more convenient. You don't want to be out there in the cold.
Okay.
It's a convenience for yourself personally. Before it, you had to be ill or unable to go to a voting place.
Is there a minimum date, like a date that you can start and a date that you can end on it?
Right now, if they go online to mnvotes.org, they can request a ballot to be sent out to them, to be mailed to them, but it won't come to them till after the 19th of September,
Okay.
which is next Friday.
Okay.
And then the deadline for that is October 14th.
Okay.
And they miss that date, then they have to go
You have
to
to
the
actually show up.
show up at the voting polling
Okay.
place.
You know, and going to your question about why should people vote, you know, and Maria brings up the procedural answers of why the eligibility and why people should vote. You know, it's their constitutional right and civic right and so on. You know, but from my perspective, what's important here is that, and you mentioned earlier about the decline in Latino voter turnout, and comparing the past and to the last election and what we're looking for in the future elections, is that why would people vote in the Latino community? Because if we see ourselves in terms of policy, we will vote. And two examples is that if we have an area that has a Latino with a large Latino demographics residents that are eligible to vote, we need that mobilizes the Latino interest. Why? Because they see themselves in the candidate. Secondly, there are candidates that may not be Latino, but they support the Latino agenda. Now, there are those that, and this is a reality from my perspective, and not working for the Secretary of State, I'm able to say this, that, you know, the candidates will promise the Latinos policy changes and legislative changes or interests that may benefit the community. However, once they get into office, they forget about that. So we need to figure out what candidates really are sincere about, that are not Latinos, that may support our agenda here. So we have really two issues here of why we will vote as a community. One, we see ourselves through the candidates, Latino candidates. Two is we see candidates that are supporting our agenda and not just giving us the same old story about, yes,
Right.
we'll support you, but then once
Soon as you get in.
once we give them the vote, then they kind of forget about us. And, you know, I don't think we need to abide by that anymore.
Do you feel like that has had an effect on the vote in the last 2 decades? Just people feeling like they're not being represented as far as agenda? Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that we need
So it's
to.
like a loss of hope.
Well, not necessarily loss of hope, but a change of frame of mind is who are we voting for?
Okay.
Why are we voting for them? And do we really even want to vote for them?
Okay. So
it
taking more
minimize-
power in what your
Exactly.
vote means. Okay.
So there's two issues that I think are going to enhance what the Secretary of State's, and I'm only focusing on Latino community. Secretary of State's Maria is working on just general voter turnout, is that the impact of the Latino community is going to be determined by who are our candidates, Latino candidates. The more Latino candidates, the better, because then it raises our consciousness of, and I'm talking statewide, of, geez, our Latino community we're having a voice by being candidates. So we need to, I call Albert Lee, I'll call Austin, Minnesota, I'll call Duluth, and I've talked to people that have said, we're thinking about running for office. How do we mobilize the community? And they're asking those questions. And I'm saying you need to mobilize the Latino community first.
So this is more towards the primary element
Well,
when you're talking about mobilizing the community, because isn't that where the general public gets to say, this is who we want?
right. Well, we're kind of backing up a little bit here, but yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, but it also it fast forwards itself into the general election.
Okay.
But you know, I think it's educational. What I like about what the Secretary of State is doing now, it's actually going out to individuals like myself and saying, you have a responsibility. Now they're talking to me. They're saying you have a responsibility to tell, because I'm retired. And I'm not as engaged as others any longer. I'm kind of there, but I'm more of a number now. I'm supportive. Okay. But as far as being proactive, as people like Maria are, I no longer do that. But I'm somewhere in the radar screen. And the voice I'm hearing from the Secretary of State and others particularly Maria said, you have a responsibility. So they're calling me as a civic servant to give information to the community on how to not only mobilize the Latino vote, but also what will that difference make. So I'm already engaged because of this process in telling the community that I'm involved in, you need to go down and vote, and here's the difference. And more importantly, here are the candidates, and here are the candidates that will support our agenda, and here are the candidates that are saying they're going to support our agenda, but really, given their voting history, their track record, they really don't have a Latino interest.
And this is something that's being communicated person to person in the community and not so much on the website? Because I know you can find out information about the candidates on the website. This is something that...
Oh, it's more networking within the
word
community.
of mouth. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I just wanted to separate the two because
Right.
Even as I'm voting, I want to hear what, I want to see the outline of it on a website, more of the professional way of it. But I also want to hear people who are actually living in the community. I want to hear their say so on it. So you say you work with, or you reach out to young people. Aside from, because earlier you said sometimes the parents weren't able to vote or didn't want to vote. Aside from that, are there other reasons why the younger generation isn't voting in the Latino community?
Lack of interest.
Okay.
They don't see the effects that it has, to their lives yet.
Right.
And some do, and I think it's just part of the exposure and the environment that they live in, and maybe what they hear so negative all the time. I have heard a lot of different things where parents expected their children to register, and the child is saying, "I'm not going to register. The government does nothing." So it's, a lot of it is the exposure, I think, what they hear, their friends, the peers. And it's just how do you break those barriers that are there for the first time?
You have to understand, too, at 17 and 18, you're still
Are you
in
really
high
in
school,
tune with what's
kinda-
going on politically?
Yes, and you're into
That's a fine line,
other
though.
lifestyles of growing up. I mean, I have a granddaughter that's 14 years old, and I'm already talking to her about voting. And I go, Gabriela, what are you going to do and who are you going to vote for? And she's telling me, because she's one of those that's very astute students, about the type of person, the type of candidate she would want to vote for, the type of representation. So I think it starts at a young age of preparing people.
Goes back to the community.
Right.
Part of it.
And that's the message I'm hearing from the Secretary of State's office, is that I have a responsibility to go back to my community at least and tell people that I network with, particularly the younger generation in my network. And it happens to be my granddaughter at this point, because she's only 14, or she's 15. She'll be 15 in January. And she's already thinking politically. Why? Because I'm involved politically.
Right.
And I'm involved in that conversation. However, if I wasn't involved in that, in the role that I'm in now in the community, politically speaking, in civic engagement, at 17, she might not be thinking about that. She'd be thinking about cars, boyfriends, traveling, college, making a transition in life. She might not be thinking about voting. She'd be thinking about other things that we all thought about as teenagers. So we do have an obligation while they're going through teenage years, is really to prepare the younger generation.
Okay. It seems like such a fine line, because you don't want a random vote. You want them to be fully aware of what's going on, but then, like you said, they're 17 and they're...
What did we do at 17? Right?
Your
And
brain's
think about
everywhere.
that. Were we thinking about going
About
to the
voting?
voting post? No.
No, absolutely
However,
not.
if we were being told
From a young age.
at a young age, and in particular at that age, on the threshold of turning 18, like Maria's saying, then it would make a difference. That would have made a difference in the Latino community 3, 4, 5 generations ago, elections ago. And now, as we begin forward using that approach, it can and will make a difference.
Okay.
Along with all the other,
Other things that go
we
into
talked
it.
about, right? Yes.
Is there anything else you guys want to bring up as far as making sure that people are informed about the upcoming election?
They have the internet. Go to mnvotes.org and look up the candidates. Put your address in there. Find out where your voting polling is, and really consider which party you're interested in, and look at the issues that are, that could affect them, whether from education, schools, tuition, housing, employment, and so forth, all those issues that are very important to us on a daily basis. Who supports what, and who's more to your true values, and look at those people, really research it, do some research online, and you'll be surprised what you find out, and we'll hopefully get excited and get involved in the future as the next election comes for the presidential.
Right.
So it's a good start.
The other thing is that if those that are bilingual or prefer to speak Spanish, they can call at the Secretary of State's office and ask for Maria and get that information in Spanish.
Okay.
Or they can call their local agencies and such and request a Spanish-speaking translator or someone that speaks Spanish and get that information. I mean, most people have some sense of, most people speak English and Spanish. Some people prefer to speak Spanish. Some people speak limited English. Some people don't speak any English at all. And they may be eligible to vote. They need to know that they can call Maria or someone in their community and ask those questions in Spanish, and that information is available.
What kind of organizations can you call, aside from calling you the library?
There's clues. There's a lot of neighborhood organizations that are doing the very same thing.
Okay.
And it is in Spanish. A lot of it throughout in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Is that at the USM? What's the website again, where you can find the candidates?
mnvotes.org.
Okay. Is that information there as well, where they can?
Actually, we just kind of deal with the whole election process and registration.
Okay.
But they can't, like there's the Phillips neighborhood or wherever they're at, that they can go to their local neighborhood organizations and get the information that's readily available to them too in their language.
And for example, in St. Paul, you mentioned clues. That's a great organization to call for what to do, who to contact for services in the community. Okay. That would be the organization that comes to mind immediately for most folks in Minnesota, but in St. Paul, they're located in St. Paul and Minneapolis, so they cover both cities. But if I were to go to Minneapolis, I'd also not only would I contact Clues for information, but I also contact Centro Cultural, and in between there's a mesh of organizations, Latino organizations, in any direction that can provide that information. You also have the the Chicano Latino Affairs Council, which is a state agency, provides information to the Latino community. You have LADC, Latino Economic Development Association. So you have a variety of Latino organizations that can be tapped into that. Good. If they don't provide that service, they know who provides that service.
It's a
referral.
network.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We all know each other, we all talk to each other, and
awesome.
We all network between each other.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming out. Very informative. I learned a few things.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you.
For having us.
My name's Sanni, and you've been watching SPNN's Forum. That was awesome.